go ahead.
Michael, how are you?
Oh, yeah.
Zero fat, zero calorie.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like
Nice.
it's not even like
Thanks, Steve.
Oh, thank you.
oh, it's just the season. Not allowed to say no.
Can't.
They're warm.
I'm allergic to butter and eggs. Dairy and eggs.
Hey, Pastor, they're still warm,
They
too.
look good. I would otherwise. Sorry.
Gotta have a cookie.
Oh, Pastor.
Thank you, sir.
They look great.
Oh my goodness, this is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you,
So now we can actually.
Just blessing our
Thank you.
public service.
Well,
As another servant.
well, we can't beat that.
Probably got marijuana now.
Good drive. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm jailhouse pastor.
Still warm.
You're saving it all for Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day.
So glad I hadn't opened that yet.
No, I wonder if it's from.
Okay. Great.
Folders.
Yeah, because I picked all mine up this morning.
6 o'clock.
Mike got 2 copies. This is the audit. Tonight's meeting. Mike got yours.
Oh, yeah, here it is. Anybody want a cookie?
Oh, yeah.
That's what that was. Oh, it is? Pretzel City, dried mango. Great. Should have a card. Got one.
I ate one. I already ate one. Spread them to everybody else.
You didn't ask if you wanted a second.
Pastor Steve, would you mind giving the invocation?
Father, your word says that, first of all, that we should urge that requests, prayers, intercession, and thanks be offered on behalf of all people, even for kings or queens, and all who are in authority, that we may all lead a peaceable and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. Such prayer is for all is well and good and well becomed of God our Savior, since he wants all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So, Father, right now, by the authority vested in me by the King of the Kingdom, I come and I say thank you for giving us such amazing public servants. And I pray a blessing over them. I thank you, Lord, that they are led by wisdom and they are led by their heart as unctioned by your Holy Spirit. I thank you, Father, that you have handpicked, you have chosen each of these to do a service, not only for this great community, but also for your kingdom. So I thank you that in this room that strife ceases and that your unity is in great display. I thank you so much for being so good to us in all ways. You make the rain to fall on the just and on the unjust, and we thank you for being the Father of rain. We pray together now in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
So we will officially call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller,
Here.
Clem,
Here.
McClanathan,
Here.
Ross,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
Busker,
Here.
Brashaw,
Here.
Easter,
Here.
and Chesney.
Here.
And now, if you'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Alderman Ross.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Alderman Ross, the meeting belongs to you.
Okay, we can start with the approval of the agenda tonight.
So moved.
Second.
And if we have any public comments, please limit them to 3 minutes. Wait a minute.
We have to,
Actually, you have a motion on the floor, Art, so
Oh, excuse me. Well, let's go ahead with the motion on the floor then.
So moved. Second.
No, it's already been moved and seconded.
Yeah, okay, call the,
Call the question.
yeah, call the question to vote. All in favors? Say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Getting back to the public comments tonight. We have 2 public comments. The agenda and non-agenda items. Agenda? Those are good, yeah. Okay. We have 2 agenda items on here. 2 people wishing to speak tonight. I'll go ahead and call them up. Okay, the first one will be Dean Wright. You can go. Excuse me? Oh, okay. The second one is Michael Mead. In the meeting? Thank you. Okay, we'll move along to approval of the minutes from the meeting held on October the 10th, 2017.
So moved.
Second. With that being said, go ahead with the vote. Oh,
All in favor?
yep, all in favor.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Number 7, presentation regarding transportation improvement program. Tips at the Freeport Albertus Airport, presented by Aaron Johnson, Crawford and Murphy and Tilly.
Well, I'll start off. I'm Aaron Johnson with Crawford, Murphy and Tilly, and recently we did the Transportation Improvement Program update, and that included, and has all the priorities as the airport would see fit, as well as, they call it a pavement condition index, and then also with the FAA priorities in regards to the handout that you have that I know is very hard to read. If anybody needs any help with anything, I will certainly point them in the right direction. But what the airport has, as shown in the list here, there are 2 programmed projects currently for the airport. One is the vault, which would be upgrading the existing electrical cabinet that's out at the airport into a prefab building to house new electrical equipment to run the airfield. And then the other job that was programmed for the 2018 would be security and fencing improvements, the first phase of that, and that was programmed at the amount of $207,000, of which the local share would be $10,350. The vault local share would be $27,040. And then as you go on down the list, that is how the airport sees the priorities in the projects that are upcoming for the airport, and how the money will be divided amongst state, local, federal entitlement money and those along that line. The entitlement money, it lists $150,000 every year, which the airport receives as a federal disbursement for the time being. But like I said, it's $150,000 a year, but that goes towards all these improvements. The discretionary line that you see in there, that is based on the FAA dollars that are given to the state, and then the state decides on priorities as they're listed on how they get funded. So there's different funding sources, which is discretionary, entitlement, state, and local. On a discretionary funded project, it's 90% federal, 5% state, 5% local. And then it would also include your entitlement money, which is part of that disbursement. So there any questions?
Yeah, if anyone from the council have any question for Mr.
Chairman?
Johnson, please do so.
Chairman?
Alderman Bradshaw.
Thank you. I just had a question on the 5% local match. Is that city only, or is that city and county combined?
City only.
City manager.
Yes, a couple things, comments for the council here. So prior to going to the TIPS conference, Craig Joseph and I sat down along with Randy and Bucas, and we went through this with CMT, and we've re-racked it based upon the observed priorities of the needing a security fence. Right now, we do not have a security fence. The electric vault was already programmed. The reimbursement monies at the recommendation of the TIPS conference, which I attended with Daryl, has been placed in here. So the fuel farm and the federal reimbursement for the corporate hangars in 19 and then 20. So the ones that are approved, you see, are all reimbursements to us. And the fencing will actually be a 4-phased fence around, which is pretty standard with airports. And that will actually delineate where our security fence. Right now we have free access in and out of the airport. Additionally, that makes difficult guidelines for the farmers to follow. And Steve and I are working on the leases right now with the farmers. And we felt this was the priority. One discussion we did have with the state is the road we do not have to make a formal decision on the road until June, July timeframe. That's when we have to say whether we're going to fund it or not. What I've asked Daryl to do is, and Craig, is to go forward and justify why we need to go forward with the road. The road would be $110,000 of city funds, and that was initially programmed on here, and we took that off.
Chair?
Alderman McClanahan.
Thank you. To follow up on those things, so when you're talking about the fencing here that we're looking at, you said it's a multiple phase, and what jumped that kind of to the top of the list, and then also when you were talking about having some further discussion in regards to this road, the state's going to give us through July to make a decision at the council level, and when can we expect some further discussion or further information to be presented to us?
So I've asked Daryl and Craig to come forward at the December COW with a presentation on why they believe that the road should be on here. They've given us until the July timeframe to make a decision whether we want to fund it or not fund it. If we don't want to fund it, they'll just take the money back. There is no penalty to us. Why right now, both the finance director and I have been out at the airport. Right now we have free access basically to the airfield. And so that's why we moved the security fence. This has become a big issue with FAA, with any security on any airport. And we really, right now, we have no security on the airfield right now. And to the point where the farmers are farming fields that we had to track down who was farming what field because there wasn't a delineation line. They've had some indications, some other problems with people just having direct access to the airfield. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Randy, from your observations?
Well, just the overall security. The fact that you could get a car out on the airport runway and a plane could be coming in and not even know it's there. And that's basically the biggest problem we have is that there is a free access to multiple sites at the airport, and we need to enclose it.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keesey.
Yeah, just a little curious about that because I know with myself to get out there, I have to go through a security gate to get in. Now, what area? I'm not familiar with all areas of it. But what area of it do they have access to get to the runway? Because as far as I know, the areas I've been in are all fenced and gated.
Part of the problem might be some of the gates aren't always locked, but I'm still trying to learn my roads out there. But the east side, excuse me, the west side of the airport, there's 2 entranceways in there that if they're gated, the gates aren't locked. On the northeast side, there are some areas there that are not fenced as well. And I think most of the south side of the airport does not have any fencing.
And I'll add, the new FAA standard for fencings are not the wire fencing, it's the new 6-foot fence as we go around that. And none of our field, there may be 1 or 2 sections, none of our field currently meets that requirements. And there's also a requirement for a particular type of gate, rolling gate or swinging gate, which we do not meet.
I have a question. City Manager Crowe, on the 6-foot fence, do you have anything at the top of it?
3 strands of barb. 3 strands of barbed wire is typical.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair?
Alderperson Bradshaw.
Thank you. Follow-up, Manager Crowe, have we budgeted for the first part for the electrical vault at this time for the 27,000 out of our budget?
It is not currently budgeted. It wasn't in this year's budget that was given to us by the airport. It is programmed for 17, which means that we have how many, 3 to 5 years to get it as we go forward.
To make that decision on, where you want to go. The programming letter's been issued by the state.
Yeah.
So the money, the shares of everybody are available, so.
And what they do is they roll, if we can't do it this year, there's a specific letting. They've had problems. Right now, there are only, I think, 3 firms that are working vaults across northern Illinois, and some of them are, the prices tend to vary, and if they don't feel that it's within the price, they'll roll it to the next. And there are specific letting times going forward. We actually see this letting on next year's budget as we go forward, based upon the discussion with them.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Alderman Smith.
So the purpose for these improvements, Manager Crowe, is to come in compliance with FAA regulations primarily?
That is correct. That's both the replacement of the vault as well as the fence, and then the reimbursement for the other things we've had there at the recommendation of IDOT Aviation. We've moved up some of the reimbursement that we are owed because we have to use that $150,000 every year, and what we are owed is back reimbursement for work that would have been done previously out there at the airfield.
Well, I see one of the improvements slated for 2021 is a fire protection system. Do you know how we provide for that now, currently?
I do not at this, the fire protection system, we don't really have one out there right now.
Because the airport lies outside the jurisdictional bounds of the city, so that would be provided primarily by the rural fire department.
And this is fire protection around the refueling area. So but we felt the security was more important with the fence, and that was.
Well, concomitant with that project is a new well. I assume that's not in the
Yep.
same nature of the ones we're proposing.
And that was one of the discussions that we had, is with the new well, is we're not sure at what depth we've got to go down. And a new well, the comment we had was the new well, this is probably an under, the figure that you see here is probably way low.
Yeah,
So
based on what we've seen on the projects that are slated in the near future.
that's correct. So one of the things we've talked about in our meetings is getting a real number on that, and that's one of the reasons why we also programmed it out there, is to really get a real assessment.
I assume there's a well on site currently.
You'd have to.
Thank you.
Well, and septic field, and that's the septic field. That's one of the issues with the road, is we have to move the septic field.
Alderman Ross?
Yes, Alderman Clem.
Manager Crowe, just a question, because the fence really goes out, if it's a security issue, goes out to 2022. you know, and my question is, you know, how much of a security issue is it then? Or when you put in the first phase or second phase, is that gonna clean up a lot of that?
The idea is that to address the areas that are, eventually they'll have a fence around the majority, but address the primary areas, having, and what they do is because of a large fence, doing fencing the whole time is cost prohibitive. That's why they do it in phases.
Mr. Johnson? When we speak of the fence here, how far off the boundary lines will the fence be compared to the farming, the farmland?
The fence itself needs to be installed within the AOA, which is in close proximity to the runways, as close as it can get without affecting the safety areas. So it's not necessarily a perimeter type fence that you would be getting. You would be actually allowing all your access to your farm fields, but yet limiting access to the active pavements and the active areas within the airfield.
So when it comes to the FAA regulations, though, do they state how far the fence has to be?
The AOA is, you know, off the top of my head, roughly 500 feet from the center line of runways or pavements, and that allows for the Part 77, the imaginary surfaces that come off the runways and taxiways that need for clear zones. So roughly anywhere from 500 to 750 feet off the center line of all your active pavements out there.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Chesney?
Thank you. Manager Crowe, how did CMT become your preferred choice for engineering?
They were already in place at this point. So they were already doing we have not gone out and done an active search for this. So CMT was already in place and they were already working the tips. That was how they were chosen. There are several other engineering firms in the state as well.
Alderman Chesney.
Are you planning then to put this out for a competitive bid and?
Our current contract, they work on a 3 or 5 year contract. So I think we have 2 years left on the current contract. And what that does is, that's a requirement under IDOT Aviation that we have to bid it out, and so that they have a consistent firm that they work with. So.
Alderman Ross?
Alderman Clem.
Just a history thing. CMT has been the engineer, the architect there ever since I've been on the committee, and that's been 12 years. Not that that makes it right or wrong, but it is a firm that's provided a lot of work and a lot of good service to us. So I believe there was I want to say, whether it was last time or the time before, I think there was some inroads made to change or to look at something different, and I don't believe it happened because of the knowledge of the company and stuff, and they're located right over in Rockford, so, in fact, they are part, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Just a history thing.
Aviation's the only place that IDOT Aviation dictates how long when you sign a contract, how long it's going to be for, so.
Okay, do we have any other further discussion?
So what I'd like to do for council is then I'm going to bring this to the next council meeting for approval, so then he can submit it as our approved tips.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we need a motion to move that to council?
Do you need a motion to do
No.
that?
Would motion to do it, or are you okay?
Okay, moving forward. We're going to have a presentation for the Chicago Avenue streetscaping plan, presented by Andrea Winter from Winter Designs.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Alderman Ross said, my name is Andrea Winter, and I will be presenting a concept design for the art corridor that is slated for Chicago Avenue and a corresponding streetscape. So our agenda tonight, real quickly, is to go through the project goals. I will present the concept design. We will review the street furnishings I'm recommending, talk about accessibility of businesses that are along Chicago Avenue. We're gonna review one block, and then if all cooperates, I will fly you through the virtual model. And so you'll have a good handle on what you're gonna see in plan and through picture. So project goals. So the overall overriding goal is to design a complete street throughout the downtown Freeport. And when you talk about designing for complete streets, you're talking about designing a street for a variety of users, whether they're walking, they're bike riding, or it's vehicular traffic. I'm going to present a concept design that's going to be a prototype. The test pilot would be Chicago Avenue, and because it's slated to be the arts corridor, there will be some caveats in the design, and I'll discuss those as I go through. But the real modification to allow for a complete streets design will be the alter on intersections with curb extensions to enhance the pedestrian safety and the pedestrian realm. Talk about street furnishings, and the modification of street sections to accommodate bicycles. So first, let's define the project boundary. I think we're all pretty familiar where Chicago Avenue is within the downtown, and the boundary is defined on the north and in the south end by the change of use, primarily within the downtown district. Commercial use is what lies along Chicago Avenue. When you get to the north and you get to the south, it changes to residential, and that's where the boundary was cut off for this project. So the northern boundary would be Clark Street and Washington down here. Okay, so the overall plan of Chicago Avenue, and forgive me, I know that you cannot see anything on this. This is a 7-block project site, so we're zoomed really far out. But what I'm trying to is the the double purple arrow. Is that the
Cursor, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. All right, well, moving on anyway. That doesn't mean anything, so disregard that. Yeah. Sure. Actually, I have a PDF right here. So, sorry, guys.
It's not going to go away.
It's something.
It's something on the.
Yeah.
All right. No, no worries. Well, the double purple arrows don't mean anything, so disregard those. But anyway, so what I'm showing you here at this scale is that the arts corridor is a 7-block site, and that it's bookended by a gateway feature at both the north and the south end. And so your north end would be to the left of the screen, your south end would be over here to the right. And then you'll see marching along at block intervals our wayfinding signage post. Wayfinding is really important. It's part of the pedestrian experience. When you visit, we're all very familiar with this community. We've lived here for either all our life or for a long period of time. And so we're very familiar with where things are, where things were. But if you're a visitor to a new community, you don't know those things. And so and a lot of times people are very hesitant to ask. They don't want to feel stupid. They don't want to ask an obvious question. So if you present graphics, information that allows people to know where they are in relationship to other amenities, there's a sense of ease, and they can move through the space with some comfort. So we talked about making Chicago Avenue a multimodal. So this is the existing cross-section through Chicago Avenue. So it's 66, 63 right-of-way. It's approximately those numbers. So we have a 12-foot sidewalk on, so again, we're looking south. So a 12-foot sidewalk on both the east and the west side, a 9-foot parking lane, parallel parking, and 12-foot travel lanes, one in each direction. So I'm presenting and proposing that we modify to make it multimodal, that there are 2 on-street bike lanes. The east side, the east lane of parallel parking is removed. You maintain the integrity of the 12-foot sidewalk on either east and west side. You've narrowed the travel lanes from 12 to 11 feet, and you've shrunk or narrowed the parking lane to 8 feet. Now, on the outset, this seems drastic. 11-foot travel lanes are more than generous. 12-foot travel lanes are very generous in a downtown. You often see 10-foot travel lanes. When you narrow a travel lane, you naturally indicate to a driver to slow down. That's often the consequence of having a narrow drive lane. Presenting a bike path is a more sheltered space for a bicycle to travel than just a combined bike route within the travel lane. So we're going to talk about the curb extensions, pedestrian improvements that are going to enhance pedestrian safety and pedestrian experience. Part of it is we're going to bulb out or extend the curb at the intersections. So as you can see on the west side over here at the intersection, so this is a cross section cutting through the crosswalk, we've extended the curb, so now it's a 20-foot sidewalk here at the intersection. You guys still have your 6-foot travel lane, 11-foot or 6-foot bike, 11-foot travel, so on and so forth. So the goal and the benefits of the curb extension there's many of them. And so you can see the existing path for pedestrian is 42 feet across the existing distance. That would be shrunken down to 34 feet, this being Chicago Avenue. So the section you were just looking at was cut through this cross section right here. So to decrease the pedestrian exposure by shortening the crossing distance, pedestrians queuing to cross the street are now out in front of parked traffic, so they're more visible to oncoming traffic. Reduced vehicle speed because you've tightened the turning radius here so that vehicles have to slow down to make that turn. Additional space for street furnishings, plantings, wayfinding posts. So that really helps to promote the pedestrian realm and the pedestrian experience. You reduced illegal parking at corners, and then you also facilitate spaces for curb cuts for ADA crosswalks. So this is the same intersection. We're just going to generally look at the street furnishings and kind of the things that provide the more enhanced pedestrian experience. So one up here is the wayfinding signage post. I'll talk about that more later and what that could look like. 2, we have a cluster of benches here for some seating. 3 is trash receptacles, and you have these at each corners and some stationed along the blocks. 4, bike parking. If we're going to promote bike travel, we're going to have a place for people to park their bikes. 5, clearly delineated crosswalks. And 5, a caveat for the arts corridor along Chicago Avenue would be these bulb outs provide a great space for art installations, which you would see an example of here at 6. So now that we've talked about kind of the structure of the street, how this street cross-section changes, we're going to delve more closely into the pedestrian realm itself. Well, before we do that, we're going to take a look at a vignette of that intersection, excuse me. So what you're seeing now is what I just described in plan view. Here is the art installation. Here's a bike rider, street lamp at intersection, planters, benches, so on and so forth. You're going to get a better view at this as we fly through the 3D model. So now we're going to talk strictly about the sidewalk in the pedestrian realm. Typically, when you go in to design a downtown sidewalk or streetscape, you define it by zones. So the street furniture or the buffer zone the pedestrian through zone, and the frontage zone. The street furniture zone or the buffer zone is exactly what it says. It's at minimum 4 feet in width, and that's to accommodate space to plant for trees, for street trees. You have street lights there, you have benches, you have bike parking, you have a lot of street furniture. So that provides a space for those amenities, as well as the street furniture being placed in those locations provides a buffer between pedestrians and travel lanes, or the car parking lanes. Then you have the pedestrian through zone. You want at minimum 6 feet. That's what we have on Chicago Avenue. You want it to be comfortable for two people to be able to pass one another. Frontage zones are a minimum 2 feet. This is kind of an approximation. It depends. A lot of businesses put flowers outside their entrances, or posts or signage or some decoration. That would be the zone in which that would happen. So here's talking about how you deal with signage and remaining and keeping at a human scale. So I'll have some other vignettes of the wayfinding signage posts, but this is what I'm proposing, and that this is obviously a human being around 6 feet tall, so that it's clearly readable, that there's directional post. This is the Arts Corridor Gateway, which would be a larger structure. And that would be noticeable from a further distance by car and vehicle. It would be something taller, more colorful, perhaps self-illuminated. Pedestrian scale LED street lights, these would be the ones that would march along Chicago Avenue. At the intersections, you would have taller street lights that would provide illumination to the curb extensions as well as the intersection itself. So we've talked about the overall plan of Chicago Avenue. I'm just bringing this plan up again so that we can take a look at, I'm going to go in more depth and show you pictures of the gateway signage and the wayfinding signage post. And so just to kind of remember where those things are located within the plan. These are some examples of other communities and how they've treated gateway examples. So it can be something very traditional, it can be something very avant-garde and kind of interpretive. You'll get a better view in the 3D model, but this would be something picture metal, kind of industrial materials, things that would project and have signage on it or words describing, obviously, naming the arts district in the corridor. And that this would be something that as you proceed around this monument, it would look different from every angle, and it would be readable from every angle. Wayfinding signage examples. We've all been to communities, we've all seen these, we've all probably used these, and so there's 1,000 different ways to do them. I think what's very important is that something that it's durable. It provides a map that helps you relate where you are into the larger context of the community that you're in. It's self-intuitive signage and directional signage, and provides symbols as well as text. So this is one example of what it could look like. Again, you see a map. There could be there'd be text below, perhaps some information about the history of Freeport, maybe providing some scan codes that could lead a visitor to use their mobile device on a walking tour of downtown, that the directional posts here would then not only tell the visitor what's along Chicago Avenue, but what's off of Chicago Avenue, what are nearby amenities within the downtown and beyond, and then relate it into a term that they understand. People know miles, they understand that, but they don't always know, well, how long is it going to take me to walk half a mile or a mile and a half? So you relate it, and it's a 3-minute walk, it's a 7-minute walk, it's a 12-minute walk. If people know that, I think they're more likely to set out on those adventures. So, and as I discussed, that Chicago Avenue is unique in the fact that it's going to be the arts corridor, so it needs to embrace art. Chicago Avenue is an interesting case in where there are multiple instances that have kind of inactive facades facing Chicago Avenue because there are no longer windows that face Chicago Avenue, or the windows have been filled in, or the businesses or buildings do not have entrances off of Chicago Avenue. So those could be looked at as a detriment, but they're also really an opportunity. These are great places that could be future murals. You know, I've picked it, this is Mort's right here. We all know the new mural that is there. So let's take a closer look at those. Here's some examples. Murals can be anything from obviously the entire side of a building to something much smaller. This is in the Millwork District in Dubuque, and these are infilled windows. And these are actually not, they're colorful vinyl canvases that are hung in those spaces, so they're not actually painted onto the building. Here's one example. This is Stevens Market, and we all know Stevens Market along Chicago Avenue does have windows, but they don't start until 7-8 feet off of the ground, so you cannot see anything. You can't see into the business. So this would be a great place to activate the facade right here underneath those windows along Chicago. Here's another example. This is Landmark Restaurant Building. This is a beautifully maintained building, very nicely painted, but it's a wall full of bricked-in windows. So wouldn't it be interesting if all those voids were filled with some sort of canvas and that told a story, or they worked together, or they were individual canvases? So the other aspect and the other implementation of art on the corridor would be at the curb extensions, which we've already talked about, and within the buffer zone. So looking at some examples of what do we mean by sculpture, what could it look like? The possibilities are endless. I think this is a rabbit that, and then this is ducklings. So you go something much larger scale, something very small. And then this is an interesting interpretation. I believe it's also a street light, but it looks like a paint bucket that's being poured down onto the sidewalk that's spilling onto the street. It's a rather playful example. So here's an example of where this is two pieces of art sculpture that aren't necessarily very attractive, but give you an example of where you could place art and how it could work together. These are diagonal. This is the intersection of Stevens and Chicago, and how these two pieces of art could kind of relate to one another. Accessibility. So this has been dealt with within some businesses along Chicago Avenue. There are a few remaining businesses that, because of a height differential between sidewalk and the ground floor of the business, there is a barrier that remains. Mort's would be one, Freeport Bicycle Company, and Wagner House. As this infrastructure improvement goes forward, this is a great opportunity to remedy that situation. And we would truly then, in the spirit of designing for complete streets and multimodal, we often don't think of wheelchairs as being a mode of transport, but it is for many. So this is an example of what the railing would look like, and excuse me because it is very grainy, but here would be the ramp, and then there would be steps that would be facing the north and the east, and the same thing here over at Mort's. This is at Wagner House. The direction at which the ramp starts and ends at the business is really has to do with where you have clearance and how much clearance you need to make that ramp compliant. So universal street furniture, part of the goal was identifying attractive, durable street furniture that could be used throughout downtown. This is it's a contemporary twist on kind of an old aesthetic, a metal strapped bench that is painted, rather beautiful in its simplicity, very durable. Within the same furniture family, we have trash receptacles. These are movable planters, bike racks, tree grates. Materials. So what is the sidewalk and the crosswalk? What are those all made of? Well, brushed concrete is the majority of the pedestrian travel throughway, and then the accent areas, the buffer zones, the crosswalks, the curb extensions, would be a colored stamped concrete. Lighting. This is also a beautiful example. These are actually over-installed in the Millwork District in Dubuque, and I think they're a contemporary take on a more antique fixture. I like that they have an arm that extends out so you can really spill the light where it needs to go. And there's a lid so that you're not, oftentimes with the acorn lights that you'll see in communities or globe lights, there's kind of a glow that's all around the light. We're not looking to illuminate the second story and above. You want that light shoved down onto the sidewalk, to the pedestrian area, and intersections. So, a modification that I would suggest that the city and other entities look at embracing to really give the arts corridor identity and some oomph, I guess I would say, is see how we could take functional elements that we need to have and do it in an artistic interpretation. This is an example with crosswalks. There's 1,000 different ways you could do this, but these are simply painted. This is bike racks. They're rather whimsical, colorful, and functional. Benches. So from something very sculptural to something that's a modification on a pretty routine bench. But I think we've all been to communities and we've all been on vacation where you go to a certain city and you go to the certain X and you get your picture taken with it. That X should be on Chicago Avenue and the Arts Plaza. That's what the identity, that's what would help make downtown, help build the iconicness of downtown Freeport. And that could be with a piece of sculpture that's very functional. Think of the bean in Chicago. I'm not suggesting we get a bean in Freeport, but it's that same idea. These are trash cans. A different way to do a trash can. Tree grates. So I'm not going to step you through all 7 blocks of Chicago Avenue because I know you've all been able to look through, you've all seen the documentation. So we're just going to take a look at one up close. I'm going to identify the key elements here. So with 1, which you can't really see here, but this is obviously the roadway here. 2 would be the brushed concrete sidewalks here. 3 would be the color concrete that's in the buffer zone and the curb extensions and the crosswalks. 4, you have pedestrian lights marching along here, and I know it is difficult to see at this scale. 5, trees, street trees. 7, benches, as identified, always having a cluster of benches on the corner and a few, depending on the uses going on in that block, having some benches within the buffer zone along the block. And I think you probably can all tell by this, but sorry, this is the municipal parking lot, this is the post office, and this is the future Arts Plaza. Wayfinding posts identified over here. Trash cans, talked about those being at each intersection. It's a good idea to have functional trash cans at a uniform spot on every block. Then people know to expect where a trash can is. If people can see a trash can, they're less likely to litter. They know where the trash can go. A bike lane, we've already talked about this along here on either side. The planters are along the intersection. The gateway feature, which would be over here, tucked in this corner. This is the US Bank building. Let's see, and that would be it. So, if this cooperates, I will we'll take a look at the model through a quick animation, and I will try to cue that up. Okay, so as we're zooming in, we're starting at the north end of the corridor. We're coming to street level. This is the US Bank building. This is the gateway here. We're kind of rotating around the gateway monument so you can get a better look at each side. This is the library over here. This is a bunch of fake trees that really don't exist, but I needed to put something there. So this is the Arts Plaza with the post office beyond. So we're kind of going to march down the sidewalk here along Chicago Avenue. Notice the buffer zone with the street trees and the lamps. We're going to get to this intersection here in just a moment. And as we do, we're going to take a look over and see the piece of art here. There we go. So this is a wayfinding signage post. And we're going to continue along. This is a piece of art that's in the buffer zone here. Another piece of art at the corner. Trash cans, planters, looking at Stevens Market over here. This is an example of where a mural could go. So continuing down Chicago Avenue. Alleys, as we know, as we've seen with Moritz and the success with that, are a great place to have kind of a hidden mural, wonderful kind of hidden gem surprise, and really start activating these alleys and draw interest. Continuing down, we're at the corner of Stevenson and Main. Again, another signage post, wayfinding, the frontage zone. So this is Landmark Building, taking a look at where you could place murals in there. Mort's would be over here to our right. This is the Lindo, another great example of where you could do a mural on the alley along Lindo. That alley is used a lot for parking. Here you get a better view of the ramp and the stairs that could go into the Wagner House. Piece of sculpture there. Cluster of benches beyond the wayfinding signage post. And we're going to continue heading south. We're going to get to the southern end, Southern Gateway. And this is here. This is the Honeywell parking lot right now. Swing around. Some bike parking. And now we're going to zoom out. So this is a good example of looking at the street lining, that this is a light that is suspended from the four corners from the street lamps. All right. I'm sure you have questions.
Before we get into questions, the plan here is if council, what we'll do is we'll go forward and after you, the goal is to approve this, to give us a basis in which to roll this into the comprehensive plan and then use this as a part of our capital improvement plan. So as we do work in Chicago and other streets, we use this as a basis for what we're going to do as we put streets back together. So we have a standard, that's the idea, and put it into the comprehensive plan and in the capital improvement plan. And since we now have a civil engineer on staff, he can do the civil engineering. We have started doing some of the sites marking the topography on Chicago right now.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keister.
Thank you. I appreciate the concept. I'm sure a lot of work went behind that, and I think it has great potential if everything works out right. But I have, with the indulgence of the council, two concerns and one suggestion. My first concern is by going to the street layout like you're going, we're taking an area with limited parking and taking some of the parking away. So I think that's something we would, if we want to turn this into a tourist area and bring people in, we've got to provide some parking for them. And with your concept, basically half the parking on that street is gone. So that's something that we have to take into consideration. Another concern I have is with putting the extensions on the corners like that, and I probably should address this to both the police and the fire chief, with emergency response vehicles cutting down the pathways in those areas. Do you foresee that as a possible problem area, or is it something you want to look at more with the dimensions and stuff to make sure that the equipment necessary to get down through there can get down through there in a timely manner?
Can I, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
This is noted, and those are good concerns. This is at the conceptual design level. Yeah, there would need to be a level of refinement to make sure that emergency vehicles could get access and they could make those turning radiuses. That's usually always what's the dictator for the minimums, or the minimums and the maximums, is the size of the emergency vehicle. In concern to the parking, I have a separate, very quick presentation that, if the council will indulge me, I think could address some of the concerns having to do with parking. And you're right, there are 41 parallel parking spaces that have been eliminated on Chicago Avenue. The west side has 44, and those remain. But I would like to talk about, I think that there's a perception that there's limited parking downtown, and then the actuality is that there is quite a bit of parking downtown. But the perception and where the parking is related into the business aren't necessarily meeting eye to eye.
I may continue, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Alderman
Okay.
Keesler.
And thank you, and I appreciate that. And I guess my concern on the emergency vehicles comes from driving them, because looking at some of those spaces, if I was coming down there with a ladder truck, I don't know if I could make that turn or not.
Sure.
And so that's something we definitely need to address. And the final thing I have is a suggestion. If this is going to be an art corridor, like you want it, the benches that you showed there are quite nice. However, wouldn't it be a little bit better if you put benches in there where different organizations could apply and put their own artwork on it and turn them into part of the artwork and part of the display in the corridor to improve it?
That's possible.
I think, if you're going to go with an art theme, I think giving benches like that where local artists or local organizations can display their own work would go right in with a theme, and I think it would fit better than the metal benches.
I think that it's important that before the get-go of decided which bench is going to go where, is that there's a framework for deciding what art will go where and what the process is for approval. Art is subjective, and that one person says something's art and one person that isn't. And I'm not saying I'm the person to make that decision, that would be a group of people, that would make that decision. But I think that what you're suggesting is very possible.
But it would be a simple thing of having a committee that they would have to apply to, and their design and concept would have to be approved before it even went on there. I mean, don't just say,
Yeah.
okay, fine, Sally, you can put on there what you want. No, they'd have to put out a concept design and have it approved. But I think even a few of those in there would help possibly improve or offset the area.
Alderman Chesney.
Chair. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Andrea. Very good presentation. So for the framework tonight, what you're asking from the council is conceptually if the council is on board with the concept as a whole, with the understanding that there's going to be a refinement down the road, i.e. we're going to discuss parking, we're going to discuss turn radius, we're going to discuss park benches. Right. The idea is what is the appetite of the council and the mayor for the concept to get off the ground. And then there will be subcommittees and a lot of other discussions on the implementation, coordination with the present property owners, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the idea?
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. I don't have blueprints in my car to go start building this tomorrow. Right. This is a long way from that happening. This isn't the idea phase.
And one thing one thing is, so she's the urban planner. Now it's got to go into this. She continually reminds me, Andrea's not the civil engineer. So the civil engineer still has to do all of the design work here and do the turning radiuses. And this is strictly a conceptual work for that.
Is it a safe assumption, Manager Crowe, that yourself as well as the mayor's in support of this?
We are. At least I shouldn't talk for the mayor.
Yeah.
I said I am.
I'd like to make a motion to move it forward.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Glenn.
If we could, I'd just like to talk about this a second. I understand what you're saying about the concept moving forward, how many changes it'll make. But I want to just let people know a little history here. Tom Dole has probably changed the shape of these streets since I've been on the council. I don't know how many times. And this is about the X number of presentation of seeing one of these, okay? I have some concerns on it. I have concerns if you're not on Chicago Street, what's it going to do for me and the amount of money that's going in this? And that would be my primary thing. I totally agree with the loss of 41 parking places. You may have them someplace else, but having been on a scooter for 15 weeks this summer, I can understand just how nice it is to get to those places from someplace. So I think overall the concept of this is good, but I'd like the people to know before everybody jumps on the bandwagon here, is this a bandwagon you really want to be on? And this is a bandwagon for this year, or is this a bandwagon forever, or whatever? And that's all I'm saying, is that, you know, I've seen enough of these that just understand where I'm coming from.
I think it's a good comment, Alderman Clem. Have you seen a streetscape program that's been proposed that's ever been implemented prior to this?
Have I seen one implemented? No, I haven't seen this implemented either. But I'm saying to you, Greater Downtown Freeport did one. There was things to change all the curb layouts and the crosswalks on Main Street. We've been through that. You know, like I say, everybody comes up with an idea and we go for it, and then it kind of goes, if it's going to go forward, and the main thing to me is I can tell you this, and looking at this is without a doubt quite a costly thing.
Why didn't those go forward, the previous plans?
You wouldn't have to ask me, I don't know. You know, they came up and then just went away.
One of the differences is that I will say that this is and from being not here before, this is a plan that was started by the city and is going to be implemented into the city's structural plan, and so that when we tear up the street to replace the sewer, we're going to go back and sewer or water, we're going to go back and replace it. We're going to take it out to the business owners along Chicago, and the idea is this is not only going to be Chicago, we're going to build out. Chicago's a start, we're going to build it out. And the bike paths, when you're talking about bike paths, that's where the new tourism drive is, and I will tell you that we're already on the map as a city for bike tourism, and the idea to drive more tourism downtown, more bikers downtown. If and when the Pecatonica Trail and the James Adams Trail is already done, but the Pecatonica gets finished, that we are going to be on the map for Bike Illinois, and this opens up the downtown corridor for that bike tourism.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Chesney, then Alderman Keith.
Thank you. This proposal, the idea that you were going to go out and put this analysis together, this was already approved by the City Council, correct?
Can you reframe the question as to, I mean, I was asked to put the concept design together, but I'm sorry, Andrews, can you state the question one more time as to?
I guess what I was saying, Tom, is I thought we already reached general consensus that this is the area that we wanted, that we were going to march down, and that there was general agreement that we were going to re-leverage our TIFs and look at trying to do something a little bit different. So I guess I'm just wondering why we're having the debate on the streetscape, because I thought this was already kind of the direction and the path the City Council wanted to go. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to relitigate it, but I thought that we got here because we've already agreed to get here.
Sure. No, Andrew, you're on the right page. I don't have a problem with that, but I look at it and I see the way we're going here, and I just hear lately so much stuff in other parts of the town and that kind of stuff, and I say, you know, I'm not saying I'm not against it, and I also said that, you know, keep in mind I said that there's going to be changes made to it and all that kind of stuff. So when we look at it that way, you know, I will vote for it to move it forward. I don't have a problem with that, you know, but I just like the people to know as they look at it, to really look at it, because there's some things you're losing in it, there's some things you're gaining in it, and I don't have a price tag on it, and you don't have a price tag in it. You know, my first thought at it it'd be very somewhat cost prohibitive.
Mr. Chair.
Those are all the things we're going to talk about
Alderman
down the lane.
And to kind of go on what Alderman Clem said, and I agree with him, it was something I was going to bring up. At what point, I mean, I want to go forward with this. I think it's a good concept. But at what point do we have to commit to say, this is the money we're going to spend? I'm presuming that this is a project that can be done in stages, that we can finance it, or we can plan it on the money that we have available, and maybe do a half a block this year, half a block next year, or whatever. But I guess what I'm wondering, at what point do we have to decide go or no go on this financially? I mean, right now, we're at the concept stage. We haven't really sunk any money into construction or anything in this. If finances still continue to turn south and we have to pull the plug on this, what's the cutoff point?
Well, the concept is, as we go forward, is as we've talked about the strategic plan, you have tasked me to come up with a 5 to 7 year capital plan. And in that capital plan, we will lay out what the different options are and what our requirements are. And at that time, for each one of the years, we will have a cost, and then that cost will be determined whether council wants to go forward with that particular work in that particular capital plan. This is one phase of putting that capital plan along with the street assessment, the hydraulic model that we're doing, the sewer assessment, all of that rolls in together. So we have an integrated capital plan, and part of the things is the streetscaping is we can now plug into also what's the cost in burying the wire. So this is not executing tomorrow. We're planning over the next 7 to 10 years in developing that capital plan.
Okay, thank you. That's basically what I needed to know.
Alderman Ross. And Andrew, you know, I wouldn't expect you to design anything less. I mean, it's neat. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. There's a lot of really unique stuff, as was when you did the art thing. I really appreciate that. I think the picture here and what we can maybe afford may be two different things, but we've got a long time to talk about that. But thank you for doing it.
Sure.
It looks great.
Thank you.
Chair.
Alderman McClanahan.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate the work done as well in regards to this, and I kind of want to look at this on the broader. This is one part of the broader overall scheme, and there's a variety of things that we're looking to do in regards to town. One of the areas over the past few years that we've said is a part of this was, let's take that Chicago corridor, let's start up by the Plaza, the library area, and let's go down past Wagner on it. We've made some steps in regards to that, and I think this kind of helps us, obviously, it helps move the ball down the road on that. I appreciate the idea that, as this gets incorporated, it's going to have many mutations, but I also, I think, I think we can kind of walk and chew gum too, though, on this. We got other areas of the city that we're going to be working on, and this isn't going to be exclusive, but if we're going to incorporate something unique to this area, we need kind of the guidance and the planning. So I think as this gets us down the road on that, I'm supportive of the concept with the full understanding that, look, yeah, obviously price is going to be a big thing. How does certain steps fit in each portion as we go forward? I get that, but if we're gonna say, here's a target, let's shoot for the target, I think it helps focus us, and we can make some better informed decisions by having a target down the road here, like this.
Alderman Ross.
Alderman Clinton.
Peter, I really appreciate your words on the one thing. You know, we will be doing stuff other places in the city. You know, it isn't as though right now, I guess, and some of it that I might have said, I take this as this is going to happen tomorrow, and you think of that. If you put it into the perspective that, yes, all of us know there's other things going on, and this is going to be part of that, that does make it somewhat of a different picture. There's no doubt. Thank you. Appreciate it, Peter.
Okay.
Chair, excuse me, I missed. So that was a motion to move forward for approval? And a second? You made the motion?
I made the second.
You made the second, okay. Thank you.
Okay, if we have any further discussion, we do have a motion on the floor.
Do you want a roll call vote on that?
All in favor of the motion, please signify.
She's asking if you wanted a roll call vote.
Roll call or
Oh,
voice vote?
Don't make it.
Voice votes, what's that?
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Voice vote's fine?
Yeah, voice vote.
Voice vote's fine.
Yeah. A voice vote will be fine. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Are there any opposed? Any opposed? No. Okay. Any further discussion? We'll move on to presentation of the draft of strategic plan presented by Eric.
It is not. Strategic plan.
Regan?
He's gonna have,
Oh, we could have moved it to this.
Calvin, those guys used to go ahead when they did, and then we did Main Street.
This one?
Bump outs into this and that, you know, that's why it's. I think the one guy. And I understand.
Lovely.
I think losing 45 versus 41.
All right. Hello, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having me back. I do have one complaint I need to issue. Every time I come here, the person before me has a better PowerPoint than I do. No matter how good I make my PowerPoint, the person has a better one. So I have no animation, but if you want to do this, as you look at yours, you'll get the 3D effect of our strategic vision and goals today. So I thought I'd do a quick run through what we've been up to as a team over the last few weeks. Mayor and Council have had a session. We've done a session with department managers and some community stakeholders. That was actually our first step. Our second step in this process of creating a strategic vision and goals was with the Mayor and Council in a 2-day session that was really excellent, actually. And here we are today looking at a draft, and then if, you know, we'll get a chance for a little more feedback from all of you, as well as community members who may have input, and then we'll come back with a final draft, and I'll actually provide you all with a full vision and goals document, a 2-page summary, and also a presentation deck that you can take out and show to family, friends, and other interested folks in the community. So great for holiday parties, by the way, right? That's what these guys were saying over here, so I just thought I'd call them out. So let's get started. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I'm just going to walk you through the general ideas and highlights from the document. The first page in the document will talk to anybody who reads it about what a strategic vision is and what it's for. And when we got together, there were sort of 2 big ideas, I think, that you all had for a document like this. One was that you would set a vision for the community over the next 20 or 30 years that people could look to and align around. That was one idea. And the other one was more immediate, that you had an ambitious city manager in a new role, and you know that when you give him something to do, like a list, I think is how you said it, Mayor, he gets it done. And so I think, as you'll see in your document already, Lowell is already working off the draft, and he's getting some things done. And you'll see what that looks like as we go ahead, and I think the last presentation is a piece of that. Between the community input, department manager input, and your own input, you developed a vision statement and a mission statement. And I think the vision statement is exciting. I think it puts Freeport in a great light as you look ahead to 2030. So Freeport will be a destination of choice. Our innovative city, entrepreneurial economy, and vibrant, safe neighborhoods support an abundance of educational, cultural, and outdoor experiences for residents and visitors. Our community is connected, accessible, and welcoming. Sounds like a great place to live. And this whole document, by the way, is oriented as if you were standing in 2030 and looking around your community. So as we go through some of these future pages, you may say, well, we don't have that yet. And you're right, because this is a visioning document, and it's a vision and a set of goals that you're working towards.
Your mission as a city government is that the city of Freeport's an engaged partner that helps foster entrepreneurship, a vibrant city by providing efficient modern services to our community and opportunities for growth for all. So those are the two key statements that will drive you as a community and you as an organization over the next however many years until you decide to wordsmith it and change it again, which I know you don't like to do, so you won't do it very often. You also came up with 5 priority areas. These are areas that allow somebody reading the document and community members to think about, what are the big ideas that we're going to be going after over the next decade or two? Where do we really want to make a difference in our community, and how are we going to get there? So these 5 areas, I'll run through some highlights from each of those in the coming slides here. So the first one was connected and accessible community. I think things that stood out to me when I worked with all of you were things like partnership. You talk about growing partnerships. You talk about regional, state government, nonprofit, private sector, neighborhood association. Partnerships were something that you all wanted to build on and emphasize as a part of who you are as a community today and who you want to be as a community as you go forward. I think the idea of being connected and engaged with your citizens and groups around the community mattered a lot. And I also think you called out things that you wanted to see happening. So it was easy to get around town. You were emphasizing this play on biking and building on the biking infrastructure and the amazing trails that you have in place and how you could grow that. And then also the idea of getting connected from the perspective of fiber and internet and that emerging economy that's happening that you want to be a part of. The second area, do it again. There you go. The second area is, wow, went twice. There you go. Is diverse and engaged citizens. So, you called this out as a place where you wanted to be recognized and have employers who were looking for that diverse workforce and an engaged community to be able to come to and see. You're an inclusive, diverse, and growing community. Everyone can participate. Access to all of these different sorts of things, including food, transportation, education, living wage jobs, all stood out as important and stand out as important as you look ahead into the future. When you look at the next item, it's education, arts, and culture. I think the last presentation starts to give you an idea of what that could look like. But here you were visioning about it and thinking about ideas like working with institutes of higher learning to train and educate your future leaders in workforce, supporting entrepreneurs, but also thinking about the extraordinary arts and culture that you could have in place. Outdoor experiences stood out as something that you felt like you could leverage in terms of the assets you had. We had a lot of conversation about the great parks and river and bike spaces that are available that you feel like you could emphasize and leverage in the future. And so all of these stand out in this section. Responsive, efficient government. So this was a core value and a core principle that we actually talked a lot about. How can the city take care of the resources it has, be responsible to its citizens, and be recognized as such, and use its resources widely. So responding quickly to community needs, using resources widely, developing a more diverse revenue base is in here. These are important concepts that you all will work on as you go ahead. City government is trusted and transparent. I think the kind of process that you're using to do this document, I think the kind of process you're using to vision streetscapes are good examples of being transparent in your thinking and planning. The public and private partners have a demonstrated unity of purpose. So there's a lot of conversation about how this plan could start to help create alignment among all of the various partners that you have. You talked about different strategies to bring that alignment to bear, whether it's consolidation or new partnerships or any of those kinds of ideas, but really thinking about how do we get the most out of what we have and make sure that as a group of partners in our community, we're all working together. Those are all the kinds of things that you talked about when we were discussing this section. The last one, the fifth one, is thriving entrepreneurial community built on our maker's heritage. And I think this one was, you know, just a real classic Freeport kind of conversation. You all spent a lot of time thinking about where your community came from, a sort of hardworking community with a history of creating new things and starting new companies, and how you could draw on that and essentially become that again in the future. So a locally focused economy, utilization of your historic buildings to house businesses, reflecting the character of the city, a creative economy with artists and makers and innovators. These are all big ideas in this section, along with the idea that as an employer, you participate in the same way. You're hiring high quality professional workforce, and you know, you make sure that there are plentiful education options, workforce options, those kinds of things. That last sentence, by the way, that starts with plentiful, I'm fixing, so I want you to know I saw that one. That's for you, Alderman Bradshaw. All right. So, how will you use the document? This page is designed to help the reader understand what happens in the document. What are the goals for, and who's going to get these things done? So there's shared responsibility, and we spent quite a bit of time actually talking about how in this new form of government, the mayor council / city manager form of government, that there's shared responsibility going forward, and there are areas that are under your purview as mayor and council, which are things like policy and budget, and there are things around the city manager's purview, which are about execution and the day-to-day running of the organization. And so while the vision is there to guide all of you in your thinking and your work for 20 or 30 years, you also wanted to make sure you knew what was going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years and who was going to do it. And so this page is about that. This sets forth a policy agenda, and there's a little definition there so people understand that those are things that are really led by the mayor and council. And it includes things like effective land use strategy, exploring arts and culture, further flood mitigation, the integrated capital improvement plan that Manager Lowell was referring to when he was talking about, you know, how does the streetscape fit into where does it go? Well, it all fits in there along with all of the other budget and planning around capital. Streamlining policy to grow the economy, that's a conversation about, you know, how do we work together? Those next 2 bullet points were really conversations about how do we streamline our partnerships and engage the groups that we have, you know, as partners working on the economy, economic development, whether it's the chamber, the CVB, all the different organizations that I know you are all talking to right now about streamlining. On the other side is the manager agenda. So these are things that have been identified as priorities for the manager to work on. Some will have to come back to the mayor and council for, you know, input, whether it's a policy item or dollars to be allocated. Some things you've already decided to do that. Things where you've already decided are things like demolition and blight reduction initiative. You have that going on. Water sewer improvements, you have that going on already. Safety task force, you've already approved that, and those are things that are underway. Other things are you wanted information about. You know, we need a better, we need to complete the bike plan strategy, 2020 census, figuring out what's the impact of that on the community depending on how that comes out. Those were all ideas that you wanted more information or information brought back to you. And so that's how those things are outlined in this document. So that's my flyover of your strategic visioning. This is a little bit about the process, so the reader who would be seeing this document could know how this came about. It describes the meetings, the retreat with mayor and council. It describes how the document came together and how it's sorted a little bit. And then it ends with, just naming the current council. This is actually sort of the back cover of the document. So I'll open up to questions, conversation, feedback, however you would like to proceed.
If anybody got questions for Eric, please feel free to do so.
Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, after the retreat, I'm sure he's probably tired of hearing from too much of us anyway.
No.
But I want to thank you for the work you've done on it. I think it's very, very well done, and appreciate it. And I hope we can move forward to it. I really don't have a question, but I wanted to thank you for your work, and I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
City Manager Crowe.
The one thing I will tell you that Eric and I talked about on Friday, I did get some feedback from some of the stakeholders that involved in it, felt that the line, with the consolidation that we're proposing, they were concerned with the different organizations that the language on the, going back, the language on streamlining policy to grow the economy and strengthen economic development. They wanted to make sure that we captured what the desires were, and after discussion, we felt that was, but I did want to bring forward that I have had a couple stakeholders felt that it did not, they felt that it wasn't captured within that, and I'm bringing that to council's attention.
Did they have a recommendation?
They recommended putting a word of consolidating basically the economic partners. And we felt that language was in some of the other documents, but and it was captured in the streamlining policy to grow the economy.
One piece of thinking around this that I shared with the city manager was, in some ways, this would be like choosing the street light today in the plan that you just saw. So I know you're pursuing consolidation, but this is a document that's meant to last a few years, and at least in this little section, this is a 3 to 4 year kind of page. Sometimes leaving yourself open to other paths is a good idea. So streamlining might mean you consolidate, but it might mean you merge and form some other interesting partnership, and it leaves you open for those sorts of things to happen, depending on how things go as you have these conversations. If it was 100% clear that consolidation was going to work, I think it's a great idea to put it in there. But you all know that better than me. So, it's kind of thing like I said to Lowell, if it's the right thing to do to change it, let's change it. But if leaving it broader leaves you more options, and I don't think it means there's a lack of commitment on the path you're choosing, by the way, when I say that, it just leaves the door open.
Mr. Chair. Eric, thank you. I echo what Mike said. Great job. I had somebody ask today, and I just want to mention this. As they read through this, and this was from a senior citizen, they said, you really don't have anything in there that supports a senior citizen or tells the status because we're a community that just by nature is becoming very, how do I want to say it, very high numbers in senior citizens. Some of us old people are living too long maybe. But is there a way, do we mention that in here any place, or do you see a place where that comes up? I mean, no, it was in the discussions because we know how much money's been put in the brick and mortar stuff in the last few years in all the Parkview and all the others,
Yeah.
Just a question,
I think it's a fair question. I don't know that it came up in a strong way in either the department, the stakeholder, or your session, but I think it's good feedback from the community. You know, I guess I'd say, what do you guys think? Is it an area that requires to be called out? I also know that we had language in there about other groups that we decided not to do because we wanted to be sort of more inclusive and say we were supporting all groups. And maybe this is one of those examples where if you name seniors, then are you not naming youth, and then are you not naming whoever else, right? So those are I'm giving you ways to think about it. I'm not giving you an answer.
No, that's fine. I appreciate that. And the other thing that he mentioned at the same time was there was not, it wasn't, this going to be the single out thing too, you know, like you're saying there, is on small manufacturing or manufacturing stuff. And as we know, we had a lot of discussion on that as we were in. But, you know, as you first look at it, you know, you kind of say, where does that come in here on this? You know, and the question was asked, and that's all I'm passing on, so, thank you.
Any?
Alderman Ross?
Alderman Chisholm.
Thanks. Tom, I think you make a good point about the seniors and mid-sized manufacturing, and I would suggest the council to consider moving both of those into the overall plan. As you know, we've done a lot with Pretzel City Transit. We've waived a lot of fees for Parkview, and I think that that is part of our platform, is protecting and making sure services for seniors are available, and I think it should be in our plan. Mid-sized manufacturing did get a lot of discussion and didn't make it way, and I think that's another good observation. So I think both of those, my recommendation and hope that both of those would be included in the final strategic plan.
Okay. I'll look for some ideas about where that might fit and offer those back to you all.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Alderman McLean.
You know, because you were in there, and a lot of, and you hit the nail on the head where we said, well, when we're going to put these in here, and I was, because I was one of the ones who said it, I said, let's not get too specific on certain things, because I feel like the more specific we get, the more exclusive we get.
Yeah.
And if the idea is that we're trying to be open and inviting and inclusive, not to do it. That said, I know particularly workforce development, small, mid-level manufacturing, those were all things that were brought up, as well as, when we got to individual segments of people, we did intentionally say, let's keep it vague.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, and I think, you know, I offered, as we went through the first draft, offered you language that went, you know, specific versus narrow, so that I could get a feel for where you were as a group. And this is just more of that same kind of conversation, actually, so it's pretty useful. I'll look at, you know, I think we can look at ways to make some tweaks and represent the ideas that you guys are sharing here.
Alderman Ross. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah.
I was just going to say to Peter, what's going to happen is he's going to email us back and say, see where I had this in here and you guys took it out?
Alderman Chesney.
Thank you. Eric, could you just show us what it would look like? Because I do share the concern of Alderman McClanathan. We don't want to get too specific, not because we don't care, but then, you know, at what point, where do you stop? So the idea is that we want to take this at a 30,000-foot view, but I would be interested to see what it would look like to, I guess, more appropriately touch on those two topics that Tom mentioned.
Two ideas right now, and I want to think about it a lot more, but one would be in the section about thriving entrepreneurial economy would be a great place to think about this section, to think about how we include the manufacturing organizations that you're thinking about. And then I would probably look at, connected and accessible community, or maybe diverse engaged citizens, to think about how we could reference seniors, and we might want to bring in like another group or two so that it doesn't turn in this document that we don't reference any group except seniors, right? So let me just think about that a little bit, and I'll offer you back some ideas, but that's where my head's going right now.
The plan for the council is we're gonna take the comments back from Ms. Cow and then committee of the whole, and then Eric's gonna take it back, rework the comments, and then bring it. We're not gonna approve it until the first meeting in December so he'll get a couple more iterations unless you wanna bring it back to the next cow. But the plan was to approve it the first week in December.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Keister.
And there's some very great ideas, just like there was when we had the retreat. But keep in mind that this is kind of a broad overview, and if we start putting too much language in it, like with the consolidation and stuff, we're going to start restricting ourselves. And with the time frame that this program is going to cover, do we want to get too restrictive? Because we don't know how things are going to change and manifest. We want to leave it as open as we can so we have flexibility in there.
Okay, with that being said, does anyone have any other
Thanks, Eric.
discussions? Because we do have a, we do the motion on the floor. No. Yeah,
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Smith.
For my part, Eric, it seems to me that this is an accurate iteration of the 2 days we spent with you, and I think it's a great job. I think we've encapsulated a broad spectrum of under the title of diversity, not just under categories of age, but ethnicities, and I think that's perfect. If we get too specific, as Alderman McClanathan said, I think that we become more restrictive and more exclusive. I like it the way it is, for my part.
Sounds good.
Okay, then.
Except that one sentence.
Thanks, Eric.
Do you need a motion to move this to the next council meeting?
Yeah.
Are you going to put it on there automatically?
Well, the plan is to put it on the December one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No, we're good.
Good, good.
Yep.
No more motion. Good deal.
Thank you.
Well, we don't thank you again, Eric. Thank you very much. Okay. We're going to move to item 10, discussion of the proposed tax levy presented by the Finance Director and City Manager Crowe.
So, I took my mic off, so I got to stand here with the mic. So this is going to be a tag team. Randy's going to keep me honest here. So PowerPoints are mine, so blame me if there's a misspelling on that. So this is it's really the discussion, and I thank you for Linda for showing up. It's a discussion. We did get the library levy recommendation this morning, and basically they've recommended to levy the exact same amount as they did last year. So that will be included in the overall levy. But this is the discussion of the fire and police. Kind of give you where we're at for current funding. Right now, the fire is funded at 77%. The police pension is funded at 51%. This is what we levied in 2016 and 2017, as well as we took out of money from personal property replacement tax. Now, the key here is the state reduced our personal property replacement tax by 24%. We have not gotten the official numbers, but we're planning on that level being the same for next year. So we have to, even if we maintain the same level, we're going to have to look at where we're going to take that funding from. So, some issues. We have the decreasing disbursement of personal property replacement tax. We have an increase in minimum funding that is required there's about a $90,000 increase recommendation for minimum funding for the state. I believe that's It's on the next slide, next few slides. So cover both combination fire and police funds. We have more money going out than coming in for both fire and police pension. We've been fortunate over the last 18 months. We've seen record increases in the stock market, which has resulted in us actually making money. The concern is if we have a reduction in the stock market, we won't see that return. So the state currently is saying that we need an 8% return on our investments to continue funding at the current level and continue to grow our funds. Growth in funds, as we said, during the record stock market. So I know we've talked a lot about property tax. I will tell you the pitch I have changed my pitches to the different organizations I go out and talk to, saying that we don't have a property tax problem. We have an EAV problem. And what I mean by that is our EAV has been reduced by $35 million since 2010. And what that has done is has caused us to put pressure in our taxes actually to go up to keep it funded. Now, what's good is our initial EAV assessment looks like it's going up about $300,000 this year. Additionally, we have increased pressure on corporate funds, the general funds, and some things we have hanging out there is the demo of City Hall. We are increasing police manning more demand for road work. The changes that we've made in the budget that I proposed, we'll realize it over next calendar year. So we'll see those changes come into effect. We're going to start seeing those. We're changing health insurance goes into effect here property insurance goes into effect 1 December. Health insurance goes in 1 January. We're going to start seeing the decrease, but the real effect will be out as we go into next year's budget. So we have 3 options in front of us that we've looked at. One is funding at the minimum level required. One is funding at the actuarial requested level, and one is funding at a level that will keep pace with disbursements. What this is it says we, as a corporate body, will fund all at a level that will maintain the disbursements, maintain it, and then the money that's being put in by the fire and police will go in as an investment into the fund and continue to slowly increase the funds. So those are 3 different options that we looked at going forward. So your minimum funding, this is what would happen here. We have, as I said, the contribution where we're seeing the change is the $90,000 increase in required firefighter pension fund. It will be an increased contribution, but we are also taking in the pressure of the decreased personal property replacement tax, so we can either fund it out of the corporate or fund it out of the levy. You will see my recommendation later on, so I won't jump into that right now here as we go forward. So if we funded it out of the levy, this is what we would be funding. It would be an $11 increase on an average for EAV homes per 100,000 per month if we increased it on the levy side. And I'm not proposing that at this time, so don't panic, please. So, the actuarial recommendation. This is the sticker shock. So, the actuary is recommending our fire pension be increased by $708,000. Our police pension is $734,000. Our police funding right now, as I said, is 51%. And the good news about the police is we have a much younger police force. The bad news about the fire department is we currently have 5 or 6 firefighters, I think it's 6, are over the age of 60, which are all going to be retiring, and that's going to put pressure on our fire pension. So that's the things to look at. This is The actuarial recommendation is based upon 100% funding. This is what is going to be reported on and this is, as I said, this is not an affordable option. If taken from the corporate fund, we would basically have to lay off or reduce services an extreme amount. You're basically talking about $1.4 million in corporate funding, which we do not have the ability to do that and provide the services that we want to without major layoffs. So this is the funding match, and this was to be a change. I kind of explained this to it. It's based upon disbursements that count pay-in from employees would go to increasing account balance, would stop accounts decreasing, begin to increase the funds. This is kind of that has been used in other communities to begin to work this issue. As you know, fire and police pensions are an issue across. If $664,000 were placed against corporate funds, we would again need to identify what services or what decreases we would need to go in next year's budget. So I am not proposing that we increase property tax, having the second highest property tax, but we would also, other options is to look at other revenue sources, and there are the other thing that's being proposed and being floated both in IML and ILCMA, and I know I've talked with Peter about this, is they are proposing that home rule communities raise their sales tax to cover the cost of the cost of pensions, and there have been 3 home rule communities do that. I know that that's not a desire of this council, but just wanted to make sure that you know that is something that is being floated by the professional organizations out there. Way ahead, we need to determine what you as a council and what Randy and I need to do with the levy, and then we need to, at the next council meeting, we do need to propose an overall levy. Then we propose it via resolution, and then it has to sit there, be advertised for 20 days, and then get it to and this is for any levies that we're going to have to propose. So we have to determine how we're going to fund this additional $90,000, whether you want me to take it from the corporate fund as we go forward, or if we want to look at some other option in the discussion. Conclusion, is I do not want to increase property tax. We do need to look, here's the issue, is our police right now is at 51% and it's dropping. Having come from a community that received the warning, that's, we had in one of our, so the community I came from, our police pension dropped below 28% funding. And what happens is you start hitting other milestones. There'll be an issue. If we dropped and we're one of the 20 worst funded, there'll be a letter issued from the comptroller to us telling us that we have to raise our tax levies or they will hold back LGDF money from us to pay the fire and police pensions. Just be aware of that if it's right now where our concern is the police pension. But that's something the state will do if we drop below that, on that 20, they have 25 communities that they place on a watch list every year. So I'm not saying we're there, just want to make sure that you're aware of it. We will realize savings throughout the year that we can be applied to these programs. We are looking for more cost savings as we go forward. Basically I'm looking for a direction from the council so we can plan in our how do you want me to fund this? If you want me to go ahead and take it out of the general fund as we did last year going forward, or if you want to go look at other funding options, or if you want me to go forward with the increase in tax levy. So that's I will leave it open for discussion here.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Geisler.
Just out of curiosity, how is our general fund sitting right now? What would the impact be if we did that without tax levy? And second part is you also discussed about possible increase in sales tax or something to offset that. What would the increase would need to be to compensate for that?
So, sorry.
Hello.
Sorry. So the impact to our general fund, currently Randy, do you remember what I don't have it here in front of me, we're funding, look at the sheet.
Amount we're funding out of the general fund?
Yes.
Currently, roughly $234,000.
So what we would be looking at is increasing that by an additional 90,000 if we took that out of the general fund. What that is equivalent to put it in references, is that's about 15 demolitions. Or probably 10 blocks of road as we go forward, or looking at other options, what we have to do. A 0.25% of sales tax would raise about $600,000
Per year?
per year.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Alderman Geisler.
Over the past several years, I think last year we didn't have to, but over the past several years we've done it. We've continuously taken out of the general fund to pay these fees. And I personally think it's time we look at some type of additional revenue source to pay for this. Because if we continue doing it this way, we're just going to bleed the general fund down. So my thing would be to do the minimum payment on the pensions that we have to right now and come up with that 0.25% sales tax to offset it so that we can continue to make the payments.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Alderman Smith.
I'm not trying to call anybody out, but there are 3 members on this council who are directly affected by this issue and probably should be recused from having a decision or taking part in the decision on it. Myself included.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Alderman Clem.
That'll be probably up to the legal beagles back here to decide what's going to happen there. But just to put a couple things in perspective history-wise, okay? And Linda is back there, and she can probably attest to this if there's one thing. The city of Freeport has always paid the state of Illinois everything that they've asked for as far as funding and paying into pensions that we've had. Is that correct, Randy or Linda, all along?
As far as I know, yes. If we wouldn't, we'd all be in jail.
Yeah. The other one, there wasn't any wrench whatsoever until, was it Gatsby, is it called? Is that pertaining?
It's Gatsby 6768 that puts the liability on our audit. The one thing that changed there was we had to bring an actuarial on board. The state estimates that its pension funds and funding are based upon an 8% return in the stock market or whatever investments are, but then they dictate to us at what level and what things we can invest in. I will tell you, most actuaries will tell you that the gains we've made in the stock market in the last 18 months are unprecedented. And from 2010 to 2013, the stock market actually lost, and that's what put a lot of the pension funds in trouble at that point.
Good. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe is it this year? Or it would have been last year. Last year was the first year that we ran into trouble where property taxes did not pay the pensions?
So what we know is last year was we decided to pay the pensions out of the general fund. We have always paid, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, we've always paid a portion out of the personal property replacement tax. So, and that's based upon what happened in 74, 75, which aligned with every community had to make a decision how they were going to do it. So there has always been a portion that has not been paid out of property tax. What last year was, the decision was not to raise property tax, but pay it out of the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Chair?
Appreciate it.
Alderman Chesney.
Couple comments, if I could, please. Manager Crow, the EAVs, you put in your report to us that you're expecting an increase of approximately $400,000.
That's correct. That's correct. That will basically, that $400,000 increase will offset the loss in personal property replacement tax, but will not account for the increase in minimum disbursement for that's required for the that is required for the pension funds. We've had an increase this year in minimum disbursements.
If I could have a series of questions, Chair.
Alderman Chesney.
Thank you. So if we were to ask for the same dollar amount and the EAV goes up, the tax rate that the city of Freeport's going to go down.
That's correct.
Okay. And then I also remember when we were discussing retirements, specifically on the firefighters, that there were a series of retirements that is likely as a result of why we've seen an increase in pressure on the pension fund, but that should be, some of that savings should be realized out of the general fund because the new hires are going to be hired at a much lesser rate, correct?
That should work in that way, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so while we've seen the increase in the pensions, we should be able to pay the difference out of the general fund without raising taxes?
A lot of it depends on when they actually retire. So if they don't retire this next year, we won't see that initial savings from the retirements going forward until when they retire and we hire the new younger guys.
But we've had a series of retirements this year that we should be able to realize in the next budget cycle.
There should be some savings with that, that's correct.
Okay.
Chair?
Alderman Campbell.
Thank you. I'm largely comfortable with this year, but I wanted to clarify, and I do have a kind of a series of questions as well. When you indicated we're doing 234 out of the corporate fund or the general fund right now, and when we're talking about 90,000, you're saying that is on top of the 234, so it'd be around 324,000 out of the general fund if we left the levy as it is?
That's correct. Right now, we're levying about $469,000 for corporate purposes, and now you're looking over half it going towards the two pensions.
Could you say that last part again? Just before you said half of it going to the pensions, the last sentence before that?
We levy currently $469,660, and of that, if you're looking at it,
That's the general fund
that's
levy,
the general
that's not
fund
the
levy.
pension
Yes,
fund.
that's the corporate levy, and if we're already putting $233,000 of that towards the pensions,
Yeah.
so you add another 90,000, we're putting 3/4 of what we're levying for our corporate, for our general fund purposes for the pensions.
I'm not too worried about IMRF. If I recall, last I saw, their last thing was around 88-89% funded. So that's not going to be too much of a strain on us. And the fire, let's talk about fire. You indicated it's at 77%, which relative to other municipalities, I think is okay. I mean, it's decent, it's stable, but what is the trend that we are seeing with this? And the reason I ask that is because we're seeing that while the police pension is significantly less funded percentage-wise, there's a significant or almost a comparable amount coming from the fire. Are they anticipating these future hits to it with the upper age individuals, or what's causing that from the fire side?
There are a couple things that play into this. It's because of where they're at the level which they're funded, they can do a different level of investments, correct? Same thing, okay. But what we're looking at is these large number of retirements that were coming up. We're gonna start seeing some of that same pressure as we go forward. And one of the impacts that we have seen, two things that we need to take in consideration is this year we've moved towards growing the police department. So when we talk about realized liability, the actuary builds in that we have a larger police department in what we're paying out. And then we haven't replaced all of our firefighters, so even though we've gotten retirement, there are less people paying into the account than what we had previously, which causes that fund to drop further, along with the retirements we've got coming up.
And you indicated for both of these funds, 8% is the actuarial, the target that they put, correct?
It's
Or is it
7%.
7%.
Okay.
7.
And in looking back historically, how often, given the conservative investment restraints, have we hit that target?
So
Approximately.
when you talk to an actuary, the average that they say on pension funds should be in the area of 5.8 to 6.2.
It is a more realistic.
As a more realistic investment. The state uses 8% based upon, that's what it gives for its, that's where they get their minimum, is based upon a return for 8%. Now, the state has even said that they will, for the future, when we go about future discussions, they're talking about even doing away with giving us a minimum funding because of Gatsby 67, 68. They're talking that eventually all we're going to be able to use is the actuarial going forward.
May I continue, Chair?
Yes.
Okay. So with the proposed contribution level for this year, if we don't have a stock market that hits approximately, I don't know, 2/3 or 3/4 of what it did this year performance, we're going to be losing a percentage, whether we're talking police or fire. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's our estimate.
And with the fire, obviously the wild card's the market, but you can't count on that long term as your investment strategy. But what's the for this year, meeting that state minimum? What do you think the impact will be? Obviously, it's hard because again, market returns. But in an average year, if we're talking that 5.5 to, what do you say, 5 to 5.8%?
It's 5. Usually they say between 5 and 5.8 to maybe the maximum is 6.2.
Okay.
And even an investment counselor will tell you that you should go, most you should receive is a 6.2. We've been getting, it's been in the, with the record markets, we've been getting an 8% return.
How quickly are we going to lose further ground on the police pension if it's just an average market?
If it's an average market, you're going to have disbursements going out will be more than what the increase in the stock market's going to be. And so you're going to start seeing it drop. In the years in which the stock market was not performing at the level, you actually saw between a 1.5% to 2% drop in the police pension fund.
All that to say, I understand the recommendation. I'm comfortable for this year going with the recommendation that you said, and my preference would be to do the 90 from the general fund. However, I'm just looking down the road. I think you hit the nail on the head and I think there have been variations of the statement. You got an EAV problem. I'm encouraged that for the first time in multiple years, it's stabilized and gone up, 0.2% or something of that nature. I'm encouraged that we have stabilization. But if that does not continue and then grow, I just want to say now, I don't know that years down the road you're going to be able to continue this type of funding level and have a sustainable, particularly police, and later on down the road with the additional retirements, fire fund. I don't think we're hurting ourselves this year by going on this approach, but we have to keep this in our mind down the road, otherwise it's going to really hamstring us on our budgets.
It will get to the point, if we continue to fund out of the general, fund, it'll become a black hole where it basically eats up all of the general fund, and we won't be able to provide any other services to the city.
City Manager Crowe. Not to put you on the spot, but what other recommendation you might have?
Well, I mean, there are the recommendations going forward is if we don't fund out, if you're looking for other revenue sources, well, we can fund it out of the levy. We can fund it out of finding another revenue source to add into the general fund. funded out of the general fund with the understanding that that's going to be putting, that those savings that we're realizing from other programs are going to be eaten up by the pension program. So,
Jeopardy.
all right. So basically, I believe that we're going to be a break-even point this year coming up if we take it out of the general fund, realizing that we're down there. And the reason I say that is that we are increasing the size of the police department. We have more, and we may get those funded out of our OJ, the justice grants, but that's only a 3-year funding cycle. They set up a 3-year funding cycle, so then we have to come up with the way to fund it, including legacy costs. So that's going to drive us going forward. Now, I will tell you that the police department has had a great impact on, knock on wood, I'm going to curse this here, but they've had a great impact on what we've seen in the way of violent crime and shots fired. We have seen, and Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, we've seen it. So I think it's an initiative that we've needed. But I just want that you need to weigh all the impacts in here.
Chair?
Alderman Chedney.
Thanks. I think, I didn't mention this, but Treasurer Buss has done a nice job managing the pensions for a number of years. I think that they have been managed responsibly. It's just this issue is not unique to Freeport. There are many challenges that municipalities and county governments are having with the pension costs, and so we have to adjust. I think we should probably discuss breaking it out in 3 sections. One is there an appetite to raise property taxes to pay for the current pension liability? I'm not hearing there's a strong yes on that piece. Absent that, I would recommend that we take a look at how, once we agree to the amount, then the second piece would be we agree to the amount we want to fund. And then the third piece would be how does that interact with the budget? So if there's not an appetite to increase property taxes to pay the pension, that conversation is rather moot until, we have to get that done by the end of this year. The second piece is we would agree to the dollar amount that we want to fund the pensions, and the third is how it would interact with the budget next year. So I would view that we kind of break it out so we can, I guess, move it forward in a more methodical fashion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Alderman Clem.
I would have to echo some of the things that Mike says. Not that I'm in the mood to raise taxes, but you get to one of these places, you can only take so much out of something. My fear is just what was mentioned down the line here, which is one of your favorite topics. That's only about 15 demos next year. So when we start pressuring Lowell for, we need some more demos, we need to do this, we need to do that, or we need to shift and tear into this road thing over here and do this, remember the funding isn't going to be there for it. Not necessarily, That's why I think it's, every year for the last, as you can look at the history on all the levies, the past 4, 5, 6, 7, there's really been zero, and it's helped. We set the pace for other agencies to do the same thing. We have to keep all that in mind. But I just wanted to also keep to the surface that when you don't add something to it, you magically have to cut something out of it every year that happens, just so we aren't surprised when that comes up.
Alderman Kesey.
Yes, thank you. 2 things. First of all, address what Alderman Smith said. You're absolutely correct. I will be abstaining from any vote on this. But if council will confirm or deny, I believe we also have the right to speak on it as long as we don't vote on it. Is that correct? Okay. And the second thing is, again, to kind of build on what Alderman Clem said, we know that we've got a lot of people retiring in the near future. I can tell you from experience that with the fire department, it came in cycles where a lot of people were hired because a lot of people retired. We are in that cycle right now where a lot of people are getting ready to go because of what happened in the past. So I would like to at least see us consider the possibility of a small property tax increase or something to help offset this, to prepare for a possible hit next year. Because like I said, with the increase in the police department, with the increase in the number of firemen going to retire, it's not going to get much better. And I think the time for us to prepare for that is now, not next year when we get hit with it.
I want to make a comment with, in reference to what Alderman Chesney was saying. He said is what we want to fund, but can we fund? You know, you said you want to fund, if I'm correct, you said, well, we want to fund. What, is it a difference between want and a can? Can we fund it, or want we want to fund?
Chair?
No, go ahead.
No, I think we can fund and have historically funded the dollar amounts that we've agreed to in late November and December. We've historically always agreed to that amount.
Okay.
The excess revenues have come from the corporate fund the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that if we agree that this year we're not raising property taxes,
Right.
and we can agree to the dollar amount, then next year we have to agree on how to fund it. It'll either be funded through priorities or revenues. There's the two ways that you have to fund it. But right now, it's a premature conversation because we've had a finance director in here 2 months, and we've had a city manager in here 4. So before we get a little trigger happy on funding additional revenues, I think that we should give our team a little more time to marinate on the budget and figure out how to achieve outcomes without raising revenues.
Okay.
That's my suggestion.
Yeah, because maybe I misunderstood you. I thought I heard you say we want to fund, but can we fund? You know, that's the way I interpreted it. No problem.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Houston.
If I could interrupt, I apologize for, this just came to mind in light of the fact that Alderman Fisher does want to speak, and I believe he does have a right to speak, but I would ask, just due to the fact of the potential of a conflict, and ultimately, you have indicated that you wouldn't vote on this because you would potentially be affected by however the intention would be. I would ask that you make any comments that you would like to make, along with any alderman who might have a conflict who does want to speak, to make their comments from the podium as a member of the public, as opposed to in their position as an older person.
Okay. That's the easy part. The thing is, I agree with a lot was said, except I disagree with the fact that waiting till next year to decide what we're going to do about it is the right way to go. We know it's coming. We know it's going to be more. We have an opportunity to plan for it and get ready for it now, rather than waiting to the last minute and doing it, and build up some money to cover for it. I think it would be irresponsible of us if we didn't at least look at it and consider preparing for it for next year instead of waiting till the last minute and then deciding what we're going to do.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Alderman Clem.
this is partly for Manager Crowe when he gets done, so we'll
Wait.
until he sits back down. No, it's gonna be.
What we were just talking about is, so the council members that are recused are not allowed to participate. If they speak as a private citizen, they get 1 3-minute period of time. So.
We're at 2.5.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Just one thing, Andrew, and this is kind of an echo to what you said. If you're right, as far as, you know, Lowell's been here X amount of time, Randy's been here X amount of time, we've made a lot of good progress. The one thing that would be the worst thing in the world to do would be to set out and say, okay, we're gonna raise taxes, I'm just gonna use a figure, we're gonna raise taxes $50, okay? And then 3 months later, you say, you know, we really got a problem with roads, and we need to raise the taxes for roads. Geez, we just raised it $50, you just raised taxes how long ago? And I'm not saying this is gonna happen in sequence, but I think we really need to get a plan together to know everything that's out there before we jump off and say one thing. But I believe if we move forward and keep the levy the way it is, I mean, you're just absolutely gonna have to watch every nickel going out the door. Not that we don't now, you know, and there's been great savings in some areas, you know, so.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Alderperson Bradshaw.
Thank you. I'm not going to make comments. I'm just going to ask two questions. One of Manager Crowe and then the next to Finance Director Bucus. If you were us and you had to make this decision today, what would your recommendation be?
That's,
Manager Crowe?
that is a loaded, kind of a loaded question, because it's, my recommendation is not to raise the property tax, but look at other alternatives going forward. Because I believe that the property tax affects a lot of different things. And my recommendation on this would have been, if I were in, I would raise it just, I would raise sales tax a 1/4%. However, we're trying to do a lot of things, and I will tell you, my discussions with the chamber, if we raise sales tax a 1/4%, that's exactly the reason they don't want to collaborate and move forward, because they feel that the count, so I'm having to weigh all things going forward. I would pay the minimum amount of money and go take it out of the general fund. Because I think what we're doing going forward with the economic development is more important to the community. And we need to show that they can trust us going forward. And I have heard that from the chamber, the reason they don't want to partner with us is they feel that they can't trust us, and they want to use us as a lobbying. They're lobbying because they're worried we're going to raise sales tax to pay for everything else.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Alderperson Bradshaw.
And at the leave of Manager Crowe, may I ask Finance Director the same question? I know he is your boss, but I would just like to hear your honest opinion. If you were us, what would you do?
My honest opinion is I don't like paying taxes any more than anybody else does. But there's a given, if you live in a community, you live in a nation, you live in a state, you pay taxes. I'm looking at not only the pension and the levy on the pension, but I'm looking at the overall economic health of the city. And the pensions, we're kind of unique here that most of our money that we levy goes to our pensions. Other communities don't levy as much as we do here on a percentage basis. I like the idea of going with the sales tax. I think you can spread it out over more people. You have visitors come in, they're helping pay it as well. I do think that we need to raise a little bit more than the minimum just to keep up with what's going on. I like round numbers. You know, the minimum that the actuary recommended, 90% to meet the statutory requirements, was $957,165. Me being a numbers guy, even I said, let's make it $960,000. You know, a couple of dollars here, a couple of dollars there. Doesn't mean much, but there again, what's happening with the stock market right now is not going to continue on. It's been going like gangbusters. It's up 20% since Trump took office, or just after the election, I should say. The average stock market return is 10% over the last gazillion years. So we know that 20% isn't going to continue. We were fortunate that one of the funds last year made 10%, 10.8%. The other one made less than that. So we're moving forward as far as the stock market goes, but we can't rely on that forever.
Linda, just out of curiosity, how much is in the stock market and how much is in bonds? Do you know off the top of your head? Yeah, can you come up to the, real quick? Because what happens is the state dictates how much we can invest in each area.
Yes, both funds are allowed to have 65% in the equity market. 35% has to be in fixed income.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why our return is driven down, because fixed income typically only returns at the 2 to 4%.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Manager Crowe, I know you had a lengthy conversation with the chamber. Do they ever make any recommendations?
No.
Or,
No.
Or just try to, recommendation.
No, I've had several conversations with individual businessmen on both food and beverage tax and sales tax as we've gone forward. Their feeling is that is something that impacts the residents of Freeport particularly. And while it is transient, they are concerned about their ability to argue against that if we combine them into this economic development. And that's one of the things with, there are multiple pressures here and I have to weigh it all. And I think I was going to recommend, much as Randy did, when we initially, before I met with the chamber, I was going to recommend 0.25%, and I had talked it over with a couple of the aldermen, 0.25%, but then I met with the chamber of increase in sales tax, that I understood their concerns as we go forward.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Alderman Chisney.
Well, just a couple of things, because as we go down the conversation on sales tax, remind you, I don't think there was a council in history that ever passed a tax that didn't feel that at the time it was going to solve the issue. The reality of it is it never solves the issue. It's a temporary patch and fix that ultimately has to be revisited down the road. Namely, you can look at when they introduced a municipal gas tax, natural gas tax, an electrical tax, your motor fuel tax. There's not a tax that this city council, not this city council, but a city council hasn't passed where they didn't feel it was going to correct the problem. Problem is the sales tax increase isn't going to correct the problem. It's going to be temporary patchwork for 2 or 3 years, and it'll be revisited down the road, and then it'll go on to a motor fuel tax increase, and we'll just look at any bucket we can grab, and then we're going to argue over which one we're going to grab. The question is what does this council's impact feel that revenues have on growth? I would argue the more revenues that you take, it's going to slow down your growth. That's just a simple position on the way that you generate, economic growth. The more burden you put on local business owners, it's going to entice them to either shop online or build outside the city. That's just a simple fact. I would say Manager Crowe and his team have done a fine job yielding well over $500,000 in savings in just a few short months. I don't even believe we've started the process of combing through every contract, every project, every efficiency, and we know all the shortcomings that we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 months that we weren't even aware of. Contracts that we were paying, cell phones that we were paying, just dollars after dollars after dollars that we haven't looked at. We've also looked at a leasing program that was going to be saving us several $1,000s, right? That we haven't realized those savings through the leasing program. We got a Honeywell contract. We've got the airport that we're discussing. Unless we're willing, or maybe we're unwilling, to take anything out of the shopping cart, the conversation will always be revenues. Because unless we're willing to say no, the only way you can pay for it is with revenues. So that's just my final feedback on it. Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman McClellan.
Director Bucas made an interesting point that we often talk about this in, what are we going to levy? We already know that what we currently levy doesn't even cover, our pensions. But there is another angle of this, and that's when we're talking about budget priorities, do you say 1 year you're going to make pension funding a higher priority, and then you just put it in regards to everything else? So I would note, this is more of a budget question down the road. We can establish what level we're going to fund here at the property tax level, but that doesn't necessarily end the discussion as to what our contribution is going to be. Now, granted, every dollar you put into that is a dollar you're not putting into something else, but we see this from the public. Oftentimes, even though the city's 8 to 9% of the property tax burden, they talk about.
It's actually, the sheets I looked at was like 9.6%.
All right, so 9.6. So I'll give you 0.6 more there, 9.6. So, they'll still, you look at it as a whole, and obviously, as Manager Crowe mentioned, it's a high percentage. On the other hand, at the times when we talk about services, we've often gotten a lot of pushback in regards to, well, are we going to cut this service or that service, and people don't want to touch services. So, all that to say, we can set this amount here, but that doesn't preclude the discussion as to how high of a priority do we want the pension funding. And that's when I get back to what I said earlier, particularly as we're talking with the police. It's gotta be one of those things that, absent significant growth over the next X amount of years, we're going to be forced on our hands to make it a higher priority, or whether you take it out of property tax or take it out of services.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, and that's one of the reasons is we know we just approved a contract with ASME that we're looking to reduce the pension impact by the fact that we reduced the number of hours that they can keep over and then sell back as we go forward. So that's one of the options we're also looking at to reduce that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Alderman Glenn.
One good thing I can say that's come out of this discussion so far is nobody's talked about laying off a whole bunch of people. That's good, okay? Second thing is, Andrew, kind of along with what you said about, that if we don't make this a priority, that like the sunset clauses on this and the sunset clauses on that automatically went away when they came up because we couldn't get along without them on different taxes. One thing to keep in mind is this may not instantly show up, okay? If we're $100,000 off this year of where we were last week, and we say, okay, let's suck that up, and some way we do it, okay? Prime example of that in my mind that I look around is drive on any one of the roads. We put nothing in roads because none of the roads bitched and said, hey, I need replacing. People, all kidding aside, but there isn't how many roads in Freeport that you can drive on that are good? That's why I say the only comment I made on that was when we were talking about it is if we're going to do something, should it be incorporated into something else where it helps the roads, where it helps us, where it does that? That's. But I'm glad we haven't talked about laying a whole bunch of people off.
The Chair?
Yes.
So Manager Crowe, you need a recommendation to bring back to council then?
Right, our recommendation is we fund at a minimum level, and it's just whether you want us to take it out. Go ahead and levy at the increase of $11 per 100,000 or per household per month, or if you want us to take it out of the corporate fund.
I will make a motion that we adopt the recommendation to fund it at the level that you indicated with without changing the property tax levy and the balance to come from the corporate or general fund.
Chair?
I move that to the next council with that recommendation.
Chair?
Alderman Chair.
So just to clarify, your motion is to take the same dollar amount we took in the previous year? Or are you recommending that we take the 3% increase?
I'm not recommending that we need that to meet the state minimum level. There's going to be an increase. It's just a question of whether that increase comes out of the corporate or property tax, correct?
Correct, and you're recommending
my
it comes out
recommendation
of...
is coming out of corporate.
Okay, I second.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor. Yeah, any further discussion? If not,
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yes.
You know, I just want to say that I totally agree with that motion and have to go with the manager's recommendation on this, because we have got to remember that in order to grow Freeport, it won't be because of taxes, it will be because of economic growth. So Nancy, thank you for all the work that you do on that and spearheading so many things that no one even realizes what you do, but the economic growth and getting all those entities on the same page is vital. And if that's what it takes to get everybody on that page, then that's what we need to do.
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Clem.
I do agree, I would have to say that I believe that there's some place that we need additional sources for income, but based upon the discussion that we've had this evening and the discussion that where we'll end up in the short term here, I would be in support of that.
Thank you, Alderman Clem. Okay, getting back to the motion again. I think we should go ahead with a roll call.
Ross,
Aye.
Smith,
Abstain.
Busker,
Aye.
Brashaw,
Abstain.
Keister,
Abstain.
Chesney,
Aye.
Clem,
Aye.
McLanathan.
Aye.
Passes 5-3. One, two, three, four. Oh, sure, with the abstention. Okay, 5-0.
What we'll do is we'll prep the levy with the library levy and then the levy at the same level and bring it to the next council meeting.
Any further discussion? If not, we'll move on to the public comments. Go right ahead, Tommy.
Hi, Bago, we got to ask you a question. I saw the crane over there by Farmer Freight, and don't listen. They put heavy pounds of air conditioner on top of the by the KCs.
They put evidence on the roof?
No, they put the air conditioner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's how they get it up there. Crane.
So we want to tell you you do a good job with the police chief, and we saw a free police car over there by the street today. Three of them. Something going on over there.
Yeah,
Just want to tell you.
Yep. Thanks.
And you do a good job, and Joey Miller did a good job of everything.
Thank you, Tommy. Well, do we have any other public comments? Anyone wish to speak?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We're done.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
No. Aye. No. Gone.
oh, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, okay. Aye. No, we're done. I'll get this down. One of these years.
Next November.
Oh.